This is Tell Me What It's Like. I'm Stacey Rain. In part one of Bill Gerhart's story, we heard about his son Connor's childhood, his love of football, and how he overcame his self-doubt to become a promising civil engineer. We also heard how multiple surgeries and pain medications led Connor to opioids. If you missed that episode, I recommend going back and listening to that one first. Here's part two of my conversation with Bill Gerhart. You gave out cans of Narcan at Connor's memorial service at his celebration of life. When I saw that, I thought, wow, what a moving moment to say, hey, this could have helped, and I'm going to make sure you all have the thing that could have helped him.
Yeah, so it didn't help Connor, but it could obviously help somebody else. And we did. We gave, I think there were 300 that people took that day, and hopefully they all have them in their backpack or purse or glove compartment or whatever. And like I said at the time, how horrible would it be to be around somebody who is going through an overdose, whether they intentionally or unintentionally took a drug, and to be able to save them so that they live to another day to hopefully figure it out and get help and, you know, eventually overcome if they are addicted an addiction. And what a horrible feeling would be to know that if you had one of these, you could have saved that life, and otherwise it's just be completely helpless and watch somebody die. And so that was kind of the um, pitch, if you will, and people really responded to that. And I actually was just looking for two that I had in my bag, and I just realized I gave them to fellow jurors on a jury that I was on, because while we were in the room sort of talking about the case, people had heard me mention this and wanted to know about it. And a couple of them asked for Narcan, which is the brand name for this drug. And it's just a very simple dry powder inhaled little plastic thing that you just press it into somebody's nose, and it works.
That's incredible. You also shared in his obituary that the number one cause of death for adults under 45 is fentanyl poisoning, and you shared it in his eulogy as well. You mentioned earlier that parents that are going through the same thing you are, that the mission is to bring awareness because people don't know. I mean, I certainly didn't know a lot of these things that you have shared with me today and that I saw at his memorial service. Are you finding that people are surprised?
I think less so than a couple of years ago when we first started talking about this. There have been a lot of public service campaigns and a lot of families who have had young people die from an overdose have formed foundations, and not only to raise money to help, but also to increase awareness. And this last year was the first year that opioid deaths have gone down in 10 years. Now, to be clear, still 50, 60,000 people died last year from it. But if you compare that to the trend of it increasing every year, and then it went down by a pretty significant number, um, that's a reason for hope and a reason to continue to do what everybody is doing. And part of that is public awareness. Part of that is making sure that Narcan is more widely available. Part of that is making sure that the anti-addiction drugs are reimbursed and widely available to be prescribed. And hopefully, if you talk to the programs that are going on in schools, it's more rare for kids to not be aware of this risk than it used to be. And so I think all of that is having a positive effect and needs to be continued. Certainly going after the source and to make it get much harder to distribute and to smuggle it across is another important initiative. And you see a lot of talk about the Chinese companies selling precursors and the Mexican drug cartels manufacturing this and importing it. And so it needs to be hit from all angles. Personally, there are two things that I would like to do. The first would be to just write a book to tell a story that maybe hasn't been told yet, in order to help people that maybe have lost somebody, and also maybe to help people who have family members who are struggling with addiction. One of the things we were surprised by when we go to these family conferences that the DEA and other agencies put on is the long list of resources that are available to people who are dealing with this. And 90% of the people in the room are people who've already lost somebody. And so one of the things I said to them afterwards is that people who are struggling with family members or friends, close friends that are dealing with this, need to be the ones who are aware of all of these services, and not people who've already lost somebody, because it's too late at that point. So that would be another reason to sort of kind of write that book. Hopefully, I'll have the courage to invest the time and the discipline to invest the time to make that happen one of these days. And then the other thing that I'm trying to do, given my background, is to develop a new medicine for treating addiction, because even though buprenorphine is an effective medicine, it is an opioid and it's still stigmatized in many work environments. You can't,
Mm.
for example, participate in Narcotics Anonymous. You can't uh, be in a rehab facility. For many rehab facilities, they have a zero opioid use tolerance policy, and many professions like doctors or pilots or other professions won't allow you to have any opioid in your system. And some of these professions drug test as a result of that concern. And so developing a non-opioid treatment for addiction is really important.
Mm.
And that non-opioid addiction treatment in the ideal world would more significantly treat cravings, because even though you're on buprenorphine, you still have those cravings, you still have those tendencies. And so to try to develop something that is safer and has no side effects and significantly reduces those cravings, even provides an analgesic benefit, would be a real home run. And we have an early preclinical drug candidate that we're working on now that hopefully could be successfully developed. And not just that program, but there are other programs out there that other people are working on that need to be supportive. And so anything I can do to help get those new therapies developed and on market would be another way to make a difference and to try to, honor Connor's life.
Yeah. You mentioned there's a lot of angles to sort of fight this epidemic and try to help other people. And one of them you said was going to the source, the people who are making it and selling it. And that is something that you yourself have done. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So to do that, we should sort of take a step back and talk about the supply chain, because we talked mostly about the demand side here. But on the supply side, the ingredients that are required to make fentanyl are manufactured by mostly Chinese companies who ship those precursors, they're called, to mostly the Mexican drug cartels. And the Mexican drug cartels take the precursors and send it out to 1,000 different little shops. Could be a farm, could be somebody's closet. It is all over Mexico. And they very inexpensively can cook uh, these precursors and make fentanyl, and then they press it into pills, or they produce it in a powder form, which can be used to lace marijuana, cocaine, or really anything else smoked directly. But most of these are pressed into a pill. Very often, those pills are blue, and because Oxycontin used to be blue, and a slang for fentanyl pills are blues.
Mm.
So these pills that they found in Connor's possession were blues, and in the text messages between him and that childhood friend, they referred to them as blues. And I had never even heard that term before. So that was eye-opening. And obviously, the Mexican drug cartels smuggle those pills and powder into the US in any way that they possibly can. They're so small and inexpensive that they can afford to have a bunch of that confiscated or interdicted and still be very successful business. Oftentimes, people will ask, well, why would the drug cartel be why would they be okay killing 10% of their customer base with fentanyl? And the answer is that, first of all, it's unintentional. Their business model is to get people addicted and to keep them alive and addicted for as long as possible to maximize their revenue. But because of this inability to control the quality of what they're manufacturing, given the conditions under which it's being made, and also because of this difference in tolerance for people, what I referred to before, it's unavoidable that 10% of their customer base will overdose. And for them, it's just an acceptable cost of doing business because they're making billions of dollars from manufacturing and distributing fentanyl laced pills. The Mexican drug cartels have a higher GDP than many countries in the world. And the latest statistics from the DEA is that they're in 122 countries. And so what is happening in the US will happen to other countries around the world as that distribution expands, as they get more people addicted. As I mentioned before, it's highly addictive. And so it doesn't take much to get people to try it, sometimes without their knowledge. And then it doesn't take a lot to keep them on it until they, of course, overdose. So it's a huge business.
That's the point, right? They want them to be addicted. So they want them to take something that
Correct.
they don't necessarily know what they're doing.
Correct. Or sometimes people do know and they just want to keep them on it as long as they possibly can. That's their revenue model. And so once it gets smuggled in the US, then there's a whole distribution network. There are the big fishes that control regions, then there are distributors underneath them, and then they reaches down into the level of people who have an addiction problem themselves and are wanting to sell to others in order to support their own habit. And then it gets down to the level of somebody selling to only one or two friends at a time. And historically, there haven't been significant penalties for people who have been caught selling fentanyl because it's drug distribution, which is a misdemeanor in many states, and in other states, it's not a significant felony. And then at the other end of the spectrum, if they can prove that what you sold to somebody and you sold it to them knowingly, and that person who took it didn't know that's what they were taking, and they die, then you can be prosecuted for homicide. But that's a really high bar in most states, and very rare for people to be prosecuted for homicide when somebody dies from a fentanyl overdose. But prosecutions and district attorney's office have gotten more aggressive about trying to prosecute those cases under the same sort of theory that if you're drunk and you drive and you kill somebody, you get prosecuted for second degree homicide.
Hmm.
Knowingly put somebody else's life at risk, and oftentimes you drive drunk and don't kill anybody, just like oftentimes you sell fentanyl to somebody and they don't die. But that's a known risk. And so, therefore, you should be prosecuted for that. And in some cases, states actually have a midpoint between the two ends of the extreme where they can prosecute you for a felony if all you did was sell fentanyl to somebody and they die, regardless if you did it with malice or regardless if that person knew that that's what they were taking from you. And that's been an easier threshold to meet from a prosecution standpoint. And up until last year, California didn't have that law. But
Hmm.
as of this last year, that law got passed. At the same time that the law got passed that makes it illegal to go into these drugstores and just walk out with stuff, that was shutting down drugstores in downtown San Francisco and other places. Remember when they weren't prosecuting those people? And
Hmm.
so they changed that law, and at the same time, they also implemented this new law, which would make it easier for people to go after. But in Connor's case, they knew pretty quickly. Uh, we believe pretty quickly we knew who had sold it to because his ex-wife knew that he had bought it from this childhood friend previously, and she was trying to keep him from going back to this guy. And when I was standing in the front yard outside of his house, waiting for the coroner to arrive because they wouldn't let me in the house. They wouldn't let me, you know, see his body or anything.
Yeah.
The detective said that they found fentanyl in the bathroom where he passed away. And that was like the first time I had thought about fentanyl and knew fentanyl, was being, I don't know what I knew before then. It's hard to remember exactly, but I was like, had no knowledge of the risks of fentanyl
Mm-hmm.
until I heard him say that on the day he died. And the same time, his wife at the time had said, I think he probably got it from Micah. And so they immediately went into his phone and they found text messages between him and Micah Saya, which made it clear that he had bought this drug from his childhood friend, and there was record of having paid for it as well too. So there was a very clear case, but it took him a year to actually build the case and investigate him, arrest him, search his electronics and corroborate what he had. And then they found the person one step above from Micah who was selling it to him. And so on the day on the anniversary of his death, 1 year later, they finally made arrests and charged him, both of them, with second-degree homicide, which is causing somebody else's death unintentionally, but with malice. Like you should have known,
Mm-hmm.
and yet you did it anyway, and that person died.
Yeah, you knew there was a risk and you took it anyway. So it was a childhood friend. I would imagine hearing that news might have been particularly painful.
I'm not sure if it was more painful or not because they weren't necessarily friends. It's just somebody that he had played football with early
Okay.
in his career and then occasionally had connected with. But Micah was selling to Connor to support his habit.
Mm.
And this is the source of a controversy that exists in our country between those who are in a harm, sort of formally known as harm reduction, and those who believe that people should be prosecuted for crime. And in the harm reduction camp, their belief is that people who sell fentanyl with somebody to somebody else and they die shouldn't be prosecuted for a crime, partly because they see it as a sort of an artifact of addiction. Both people being addicted. That partly because they don't want that person who sold it to not like try to save that person, call 911 and be there, to save them instead of like walking away because they're afraid of getting prosecuted, and partly for other reasons. And then there are those of us who are in the camp, which I believe, which I'm more in,
Mm-hmm.
that believe that they should be prosecuted because there should be awareness amongst everybody who is selling fentanyl knowingly that they do so at the high risk of being incarcerated if somebody dies from what they're selling. And that awareness is not amongst, I guarantee you, the majority of people that are selling. They don't think that they're going to be prosecuted for a homicide, and they don't think that they're going to be incarcerated as a result. And I think that the more evidence there is of that happening, the less they will sell to other people, knowing that right now there's no risk other
Mm-hmm.
than obviously somebody they know dying. So for those reasons, and also because of the extenuating circumstances around this case, even though we know who it is, and that person is, friends with, other people that are friends with the family or Connor or whatever, and he has his own tragic case, I felt like it was important for the district attorney to prosecute this case, which they are doing to the best of their ability. It's not over with. It's actually still in the first inning
Oh,
here,
okay.
but it's hopefully will get to the point where it gets prosecuted, but it's not easy.
Mm-hmm. But even where you're at seems like it could help with, as you said, getting to the source and at least being some sort of deterrent now that they're willing to
I hope so.
prosecute and they are
Yeah,
doing it.
I hope so. I hope so. He kept selling it to other people after Connor died. And that knowledge is another reason why I believe it's appropriate for him to be prosecuted. Now, having said that, the judge, through multiple hearings, has reduced the charge to involuntary manslaughter because the judge believes, given all the evidence,
Mm-hmm.
that there's a good chance that Connor did know, even though there's no evidence, and that this person did not sell it to him with malice, and negligence, and met the other standards for second degree homicide. So that's fine, and hopefully he will still get prosecuted and convicted for involuntary manslaughter, because it's important for that to be on somebody's record who acted with such willful disregard for his and other people's lives, primarily to make money.
Hmm.
I mean, he was making a lot of money from selling these pills. So these things are really hard to prosecute, is my point. But the district attorney's office in San Diego is committed to trying to do that where they think that they can, which I think is important. And hopefully, people who are responsible for selling fentanyl and other people will be convicted, and 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 that will send a clear signal to others who are involved in selling or thinking about selling or don't believe there's much risk in selling.
Right.
I
Doesn't.
think you just have to attack it from all angles in order to make a difference with this epidemic.
That's what I was just thinking. It's, you've got addiction fueling addiction. He's selling because he wants to fund his own addiction, and it's just going up and up and up, which is important to fight against. But also, the awareness level is really important too. Just knowing, that you need to be telling people, or that we should all be telling people just this one. I think you said I think your family said in his obituary, just one pill can kill.
100%.
Um, Lots of families are dealing with addiction now and opioid addiction. What advice do you have for them?
Well, I wished I had more warning and more time to try to help Connor. We had the one incident. We thought that he was on medicine. We thought he was okay, and so we didn't have the experience that a lot of families have, where a family member or a close friend to the family is suffering from addiction and has tried to beat it and is in and out of rehab. Unfortunately, rehab has a high failure rate, and and the reasons for somebody being addicted are complicated. Oftentimes, there's an overlap with mental illness, which could be depression or anxiety, or being somewhere on the spectrum, or bipolar, or whole like history things that, if left untreated, makes it hard to treat the addiction. So um, I would just encourage families to reach out to the different resources that are available. Find a doctor who's comfortable prescribing Sublocade, which is a once a month injection that, if people can stay on it, they can be safe, and it gives them time to sort of figure everything else out. Um, and to, don't give up.
You, in his at his memorial service, at his celebration of life, you implored people to make the most of every moment, and you said you were trying to move to gratitude and love for who Connor was and what you had with him. And then you said, "Lucky me." Service.
Yeah, I did. I said something to somebody that I said, "Hey," he said, "You have kids?" And I'm like, "Well, I have a daughter and I had a son." And they said, "Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that." And I'm like, "No, I mean, I had a son. Like, a lot of people didn't have a son for any period of time, or some people's sons died much earlier. And I had Connor. We had Connor for 31 years, and those memories I will cherish for the rest of my life. So I'm grateful for everything that he gave and everything that he meant to all of us, and those memories that he gave us that are, enduring beyond, him being walking on earth with the rest of us. So I appreciate that and find comfort in that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big believer that there's opportunity in every negative event, and even horrible, tragic, events like this, where you have a child pass away early in life. And I'm not sure if I've found the opportunity yet, but one of the clear opportunities is to cherish life, cherish your friends, cherish your family, and be aware that nobody has an expiration date that is going to be necessarily 80s, 90s, or 100, right? I mean, people die every day for different reasons. Um, Disease, violence, accident, etc. And so having that awareness, hopefully, and thinking about and knowing kind of that that can happen helps me, maybe helps others treasure not only every day and to try to make the most of your life while you're here, but to also treasure those moments with your loved ones and have that awareness when the inevitable conflicts or stress or disappointments or failures, happen. Um, I'm fortunate that with Connor, nothing really was left unsaid. I don't have, I mean, I have regrets about maybe more that I could have done. I've been more aware of what the risks were. Tried to meet with him more regularly, tried to sort of teach him earlier how to talk about his feelings or what he was thinking instead of talking at him,
Mhm.
listen more, talk less, so that hopefully later in life he would be able to tap into like what was actually going on inside and to be able to talk about it. I've only had one dream about Connor really since he passed away. People ask me that all the time. And the
Mhm.
one dream I had was where I asked him, why? And his answer was, I wish I knew. Um, and so he didn't have really that capacity to really sort of kind of help, you know, himself get to a better place. And so that's really kind of a tangent. I think the main point is to to make to make the most out of your relationships now, to have that awareness. And like I've said this a couple of times, and it's kind of a cheap shot, but people all the time get twisted about like what are really kind of minor things, and I have to remind them, like my mom recently, like, don't get so twisted up about like something that's so insignificant, like, the other person could be gone tomorrow, you could be
Mhm.
gone tomorrow, and this is not how you want to spend that time that you have with each other. And so just have that awareness and hopes that that'll enable you to live a more fuller life and a more joyful life and to have more, meaningful, healthy, relationships with people. And that's what I've tried to do more of since Connor's passed away.
Despite the pain that Connor had, both physically and mentally, he did live, from everything you've described, he lived a beautiful life filled with love, and he brought a lot of love to all of those around him. Um, what do you want people to remember about Connor the most? What's his legacy?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's a good point that he was able to be the person he was despite what he was dealing with, um, despite the demons, in his head, despite the pain that he's experiencing, despite maybe some depression that he was dealing with, um, despite maybe, multiple concussions that had dulled some of his cognitive ability. I think that's just speculation on my part. But despite that, he was still like such a superstar with people around him. At his celebration of life, he had 50, 60, 70 people from his office show up. And many of them talked about him in ways that we weren't aware of and didn't appreciate until they did so. And how he brought that warrior spirit and those leadership skills and those ability to make people feel good about themselves and to enjoy being around him to his work as well as to his family. And he could light up a room when he walked in. He always had a smile on his face, no matter what was going on, inside. And he never said, I don't think any of us ever heard him say a bad word about somebody else, which is hard in this life, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I'm guilty of that. Most people are, and
Yeah.
and oftentimes you don't appreciate that about somebody completely until they're not here anymore. So, kind of going back to that, finding opportunity in every event is finding opportunity to give people their eulogy while they're still here
Mm.
in different ways. I'm currently doing a podcast as a host of a friend who is celebrating his 70th birthday, and a group of us are going on a big golf trip in Ireland. And I've taken the opportunity to do a podcast for the first time, partly because I want to make the event more meaningful for him and for everybody else, but partly because I want to have the conversation with him that many of us don't think about having until after somebody has left
Mm-hmm.
and gone. And you can't have that conversation, or you can't tell that person what they mean and what impact they have and the importance they are in your relationship, uh, while they're alive. Most people don't do that, right? And so I kind of want to celebrate people's lives, whether it's my daughter, my wife, close friends, etc., family, sister, mom, while they're here. That's another hopeful opportunity that I'll find coming out of this negative event. The Italian writer Italo Calvino observed that a person's life consists of a collection of events, the last of which could change the meaning of the whole. Uh, and while true, I don't want the last thing that happened to Connor to sort of define who he was and how we remember him. I want to remember the first 30 years of his life, which were amazing and completely grateful for. And I want other people to understand and to know that as well too. And so that's another reason for why I am not hesitant to talk about Connor. I like to talk about Connor. It helps me remember that part of his life, and hopefully will help others as well too.
Bill, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about Connor and his legacy.
Yeah, I enjoyed the opportunity to do so. It's taken a while to be able to talk about Connor without falling apart, and I've worked hard to try to move from pain and loss and grief to love and gratitude, and for all that he meant to us and all that he gave us in his short life here. And I'm not quite there yet, but uh, talking about him and trying to help others in this way is feels like a healthy way to think about it, and a healthy way to try to to be.
Thanks to Bill Gerhart for sharing his son Connor's story. While we can't go into detail, what I can say is that the prosecution of those responsible for Connor's death is ongoing, and that Connor's family continues to carry the heavy emotional burden of this loss. If this episode resonated with you, please share it and help us raise awareness, because one story shared might prevent another person lost, another family from living through the excruciating pain of losing someone. Find show notes and more information at tellmewhatitslike.com. Thanks for listening.